Hi everyone, welcome to my home office. We're going to talk today about taking operations to the level of our process and thinking through how we design process to get logical, efficient, and effective outcomes and to reach our goals. You know, one of the things that we can run into here that can be a little problematic and set a stage where we're not going to achieve what we want to is what we call process bloat. And that's where a process is allowed to just grow out of control. And instead of reevaluating the process and really doing an analysis of it and cutting out steps we don't need, getting rid of waste, we spend the time instead on just adding steps and not streamlining. And so before you know it, you have a large process bloat that really makes it difficult for people to stay on task, to reach the outcomes, and definitely to be efficient. So Ryan Holmes said, workflow and usability are not afterthoughts. They impact the core of any project and dictate how it should be engineered. Paying attention to what we put together and how we design things becomes very important for us. Now, process engineering really comes down to taking your process, which describes who does what and when and why. So this focuses on business outcomes, on efficient outcomes, repeatability, measurability, predictability, and standardization. So when we get in later, we'll talk about Lean Six Sigma. The Six Sigma component is about standardization of process. And that allows you to eliminate a lot of error that can occur when people aren't predictable and aren't standardizing what they do. But the process contains two components, right? So this is the workflow, describing what is done and how, with what emphasis on a tool. So tool behavior, interaction points between people, business rules that will have an impact on this. It's about system design, the nuts and bolts of the solution. So how does that look in terms of a flow? This is usually a picture, is the workflow. The procedures are about what is done and how with the people involved. So what are those people supposed to do? It's the work instructions for each step within the workflow. Now these have to align. If I'm looking at a workflow, which are my pictures, and it's moving me through certain stages, then if I have the procedures right next to it, those instructions for the employee should align with what the picture is showing me. And we'll get into that a little bit later, in that in your workbook, you have multiple different examples of the workflow. But this becomes very important because the process needs to really help you standardize the workflow, eliminate waste in your process overall. And if I'm a new employee and I come in, I should be able to look at that process. I should be able to see the workflow and the procedures, the written instructions of how I should do things, what steps I need to take, the instructions for me, and know how to do my job. And if I can't, one, lay my hands on anything like that, or two, it is bloated to the point that I can't really follow it, that becomes really problematic. It's even worse if I have access to nothing. If no process is defined clearly on paper, that makes standardization almost impossible to achieve because I have nothing to use to evaluate what's going on to see if what I expect to be happening is, because there's nothing written down for me to look at. So there are some different tools we can use in process engineering to help us understand what's happening in our current environment. So a Sipoc is one of those tools. It's a Lean Six Sigma process. It's a high-level tool to give you an idea of what's happening, inputs to outputs within your system, and it helps you document what's going on with kind of that high-level insight. So this can really help you clarify the scope of a process, to identify the different stakeholders involved throughout the process, and to let you really understand what kind of inputs and outputs go into this. Now, what's a Sipoc? What does that stand for? It's an SIPOC. It's a high-level review of the process, and the S stands for supplier. So persons and organizations that provide inputs into your process. Who are they? I is input. Resource that is added to a process by a supplier. So what kind of inputs are you getting from those suppliers? I need to define those now. P is the process itself. So the series of steps where I take my inputs and I convert them to the output, right? So what process is involved in that? These really in a Sipoc, it's the high level steps, the larger steps in the process. Then the O stands for output. So what is actually coming out of that process? What's the output of the work? And then C stands for the customer, the end user, the person who receives this product or service, right? Who are they? And I define them. So Sipoc gives me this way in which I can stand back from the work we do and really see it in a stream of how it comes into our organization, gets converted into a product or service, and then how it gets outputted and who it goes to on the other end, right? So you're going to see here on the screen a diagram of a Sipoc for a pharmacy. And this is actually a map for a prescription. So how the prescriptions, the suppliers of the prescriptions, how those come in your door, right? Your inputs, what kind of tools do you use at this stage? So the prescription itself, the telephone, a computer, a printer, drug directory, right? There's different inputs you would use here. Then you get the process, and this is a higher level process, the major steps, and you'll notice that wait time is identified on here, including decision points, which decision points are always a diamond shape. So I have a decision point node and I go yes or no, and that moves me to a different place in the process. Then the outputs, the medicines, the dosage device, the billing to insurance company, and then the customer. So who's actually going to be picking up the script, taking it out the door once it's already done. So as you can see, this is an example of just filling a prescription and putting it into a Sipoc so I can see at a higher level what goes into creating this, what it goes through when it's here in terms of a process, and then who it gets spit out to on the other end. This becomes very valuable to me because I really start to understand how things flow in my company from when it walks in the door to when it walks out of the door. That's an overview of a Sipoc. Now, the next video you'll watch, we're going to really get into the benefits of workflow and workflow analysis. But I want you to really think about the Sipoc, and you can that was an example of, for a pharmacy, a prescription. Take another service offered in the pharmacy and go through the stages of a Sipoc and how that would actually kind of align through that. And that'll give you some practice in applying a Sipoc and stepping back and getting a better idea of how different things work in your pharmacy. So until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next video.